Tony Rodrigues is a secret space program witness. He has spent time on the moon, Mars, and Ceres, and he has written a new book about some experiences that he recalls that covered a 10-year period during the middle of his 20 and back program, where he got to spend time in a Starmaker project.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome back, Tony, to Exopolitics Today.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Salla. It's great to be here. It's been far too long.
Yeah, you've been doing some very interesting work recently, and I know your book, Ceres Colony Cavalier, really, it was a bestseller and really kind of like has given you a lot of attention, but you also went out into the field to kind of like validate your experiences. So you want to share what you've been doing to validate the experiences that you describe in Ceres Colony Cavalier?
Absolutely. And it's ongoing. So it's not something that I researched years ago and ran out of material. I keep finding new evidence. So the more I look for it, the more I'm finding evidence. Recently, we found the plane in Peru that is described, the C-46 Commando. It's something that I went on record, I believe, as early as when I was filming with you. I know it was very soon in my memory recall that I recalled that it was a C-46 Commando, and I'd been looking up the plane. It's a unique plane, cargo plane, that we have been using in Peru. And about 5 months ago, I did an interview for a Spanish-speaking ufology channel, and there were Peruvian pilots that saw the interview, and they wanted to speak with me directly. So we set up a Zoom call, and we started talking, and I asked them throughout, and we had to have a translator, so they spoke Spanish. These were guys that were in the Peruvian Air Force, one of them for almost 30 years, and he's still active, still flying. And I said, in the middle of talking, I asked, what do you know about a C-46 Commando that the narcos used? And he said, oh, the Commando, he said, that's in Pucallpa. And real quick, just matter-of-factly, he said that he was involved in working with the Air Force in the war on drugs in 1990, and they did a raid on the narcos that had planes based in a place, Puerto Maldonado, which is I believe it's 17 miles or maybe more than that, 30 miles east of where I was staying when I was in Peru during my 20 and back. And so they were storing the plane there. And he said we confiscated it in 1990 from the narcos in the war on drugs, and they were going. In the early 90s, they were going to these towns that were known for shipping cocaine, among other drugs, out of Peru, and they would blow up the runway and confiscate all their equipment. So that was the war on drugs in the early 90s. Everybody remembers it. Anyhow, I went and immediately looked, and in Pucallpa, at the bottom south end of the public runways where they keep these planes, and sure enough, the plane that I remember and that I described is currently there, as far as I know. And about 2 weeks later, one of the guys in the Zoom call was able to go there physically and get pictures of the plane directly. And so it's another element of my testimony that I called out years ago, 6 years ago, that was confirmed only recently. So that plane is there. And there are other things that we're doing. Nowadays, I think the entire subject matter is very convoluted. There are people that are coming out. There's a lot of attacking going on, and so in order to respond not directly to people that have attacked my testimony directly, I've only just not responded to them directly, but just went back and revisited my own testimony, my own evidences, and so that I can just present. So people attack me and say, Tony, for whatever reason, and I don't believe you. I can say, well, that's great, but you have to explain this away. You have to explain the fact that I know my way around Peru very well, and I've never been there. And along with Seattle and Inyokern and Ceres and other events that overlap greatly with other testimonies. So I'm just polishing my own testimony rather than jumping into the fray, because we're really seeing a concerted effort to greatly dissipate the information of the secret space program, or the programs that are going on, and the fact that we have infrastructure in the solar system and world corporations and governments currently working in space. And so we're really seeing an effort to disguise the information that we've uncovered and that you've uncovered on your channel over the last 7 or 8 years.
Well, that is very important, because I know that the intelligence community are trying to muddy the waters, putting out a lot of contradictory information, getting their assets to muddy the waters. And we know that they do that because there was one of the documents that was released by Edward Snowden showed that the NSA was working with Britain's GCHQ and the other Five Eyes intelligence agencies to conduct covert deception, to conduct online covert deception programs, and some of those dealt with UFOs. So, there's a document that actually shows that this is going on. So it's very important that we do make the effort to validate our testimonies, people who have had these experiences, and that's something to your credit that you have made that effort. I mean, clearly, trying to prove that you were on Ceres or you were on Mars or on the moon, that's always going to be difficult. But that you were first for 5 years, you were first in Peru and then in Washington State, used as a slave, exploited. Those are things that you can show, you can prove, and you've made progress in that. And that's wonderful that you've been able to track down some Peruvian pilots that corroborate the plane that you were taken on when you were doing the drug smuggling with the cartels there in Peru.
I just want to say that there may be other evidence forthcoming that I just don't want to share. I'm still in the process of working. In the beginning, I was just trying to get my story heard. I just wanted to tell my story and kind of support others that were out at the time. We're talking 2016. I was just trying to tell my story, and so to support other people, to show overlap, and and also emphasize that the treatment that I got and the things that I witnessed do happen. Mm-hmm. And in the beginning, so we really picked the low-hanging fruit as far as presenting the evidence. So now that we've seen a really ramping up and a lack of others, also, I thought there'd be hundreds of people like me by now talking publicly, and just a lack of other very linear testimonies like mine, other books like mine coming out. So because of that and because of the attacks, so I'm just revisiting it all and really trying to go back and with a fine comb and go through all my evidence, and it's my form of defending myself.
Well, your testimony and your experiences for that 20-year and back is kind of like pretty unique. I mean, there are a few others that have had similar experiences, but for that entire 20-year period, I mean, you were used as a slave as punishment for this kind of like childhood incident involving one of your classmates. And so, your experiences give us an insight into how people are forcibly taken or sometimes tricked into joining one of these secret space programs, and they essentially are used as slaves, and they're just exploited and treated horribly. So your experiences give us a good idea as to the extent and how this is done. So it's very important, especially as we enter into a new era where there's just greater transparency and accountability, that we want to make sure that people who have been caught up or treated in this abysmal way in these secret space programs, that they're given their chance for freedom, of course, but also some kind of reconciliation or justice.
In the beginning, I was really just wanted to get it all off my chest. I never really had a great deal. When I lived through it, at the early ages after I was taken, I had a great deal of anger. I was an angry kid. But now it wasn't like that. My testimony wasn't based on a place of revenge. I think that the secrecy is how they've gotten away with the criminality of it all. And so I think just sharing it is all of the justice we need. Like, to move past it, we have to identify that a problem exists, and my testimony did that. So that's I really wouldn't want, and it's hard to say this, in front of a camera and a lot of people, but I wouldn't want the wheels of justice to stop up disclosure for everybody. And I think just letting people know that it can be abused in this way, and that it did happen, that there are great crimes that go on, shining a light on it is really what it needs, just to raise the temperature and the awareness of it. And then it will suddenly not make sense. So people have been doing this behind closed doors and without any kind of repercussion. So I don't feel that they, I'm not angry. That's what I'm saying. I feel just speaking about it and letting the truth out will prevent it from happening. People, if they weren't behind closed doors, if they were on a stage, they'd be too embarrassed for the treatment of other human beings that they've done to do it again, for it to continue. So just speaking about it and sharing the information, I think, is my main goal. So.
Well, it's very interesting because in a way, people look at slavery as kind of like this atavistic event that had happened centuries ago. Slavery was part of the colonial system, but we became enlightened, and now we're kind of like in this industrial and moving into a post-industrial society, and slavery is a thing of the past. But what we've learned through a number of people's testimony is that slavery was exported into space, and that it really just has been conducted out there and is quite extensive, and that there's extraterrestrial civilizations that trade slaves, and that that's a big part of their economy. So, how do you deal with that?
Well, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I've seen recent numbers that suggest that there are more slaves in the world today, without adding any extraterrestrial component, that in industry today there are more slaves globally than there ever have been alive. So slavery is alive and well. When I did my talk last year at the GSIC conference last October, I did have some numbers, and it was, I believe, 6 in 1,000. It was somewhere around there, 5.9. So 6 people out of every 1,000 on the planet are slaves, currently living in slavery. So it's not a problem that we solved. We did not enlighten past it, and it's alive and well in corporations where they can get away with it. Like I said, places that they can hide it behind closed doors and not be publicly embarrassed for owning slaves, it's happening. And specifically in the lithium battery business. So that's what we're hearing, is that's the main driver of slavery today, is the mining of the lithium and cobalt, if I'm not mistaken. And so that carries on. It's just, there's a form of logic about it. And I personally had to reconcile my feelings and what I'd gone through, and researched it. I researched a lot of things that were ugly about my testimony, so in order to understand what happened to me and why. And the SRA, the abuse, the human sacrifice, there were things that they did that were terrible, and I understood, and I can't get my head around, because as a logic person, as a father, and just as a human, I couldn't get my head around how people could do that. But when you look at the history of how we got here, there's a form of logic, and there's a process that led to it. And I believe that slavery, in the long run, will be self-defeating and will be phased out, just as a matter of logic. So there's only so long that a society can get away with it before it's detrimental to the health of them. Before it, they're eating their self. It's an entity that's eating itself, basically. So slavery in the long run, over the course of a very long play, isn't going to work.
Yes, we need to bring transparency into it and throw the light into all of these different projects on space or on Earth, where people are being abused. So, you have some important experiences during your 20 and back, and we know you described in your first book, Ceres Colony Cavalier, the 2 main periods. The first 7 years that you were on Earth, whether it was Peru, Washington, being used as a slave, and then you spent roughly 13 years uh, in quick succession on the Moon, Mars, and Ceres. The Ceres was the bulk of that, and you were again exploited as a slave. So this book, new book, Project Starmaker, really takes us into this something that happened during your time on Ceres. So you want to tell us, what it was that made you write this book? Because it's different to Ceres Colony Cavalier, which is, I think, it's kind of pretty chronological. This one seems to be much more episodic. So you want to tell us?
Absolutely. Project Starmaker. Well, I didn't expect Ceres Colony Cavalier to be received the way it was. It is still being received, and I still have people reach out to me. Today, I had 2 people contact me and say they just finished reading it, and the book really opened their eyes, and they were, having a hard time processing it. Like, it was life-changing for the way that they're thinking about things that they've experienced. So a lot of people have read Ceres Colony Cavalier and then immediately contacted me because it connected dots for them. And so because of that, and because there was a great outpouring of people, please write another one. And I didn't really have, I have a bunch of short stories, a bunch of fragmented memories. I really got a lot into Ceres Colony Cavalier. So Jackie Kenner, who I'd done my show, Talks with Tony, she was my co-host for a year and a half, I'd say 2 years. After you film the show, you get to talk. How did you know that? Tell me, where did you learn that? And I told her about the stories that are in the book. And she said, this is the story you need to tell, but it just doesn't make sense if you don't do Ceres Colony, if you don't do the big one. And she was excited because of things that she'd lived through herself. So her own life experiences lined up with things that I was telling her that were a completely different animal. And so we got together and did this. And it's a short book. It's not, it's a sequel. It's not an equal to the first one. It's a short book, and it's a collection of stories. And it's purposely confusing because the experience of remembering decades ago, several things that have one thing ties to another. When I work with people that are remembering, going through, it's never linear. It comes through, and they remember this emotion of, say, anger randomly. They remember the next time that it was angry, and that comes out in the story. So it's not linear. It's very confusing to remember things like this. So Starmaker was put together in a manner that would convey the confusion of remembering. These are very distant memories, very vague for me. So it's very hard for me to just rattle it off the top of my head. The things these are very distant memories, but they overlapped with what she had gone through, and they overlapped with what happened to me. And when I really look back on it after the book was completed, and I look back on the timeline of my life, the events of my life, there really are some good reasons in there why I may be different than other people that have been through the programs in the same exact way that I have been. And the story that happened in Project Starmaker may explain why I'm the one that remembers and is here talking about it. So we got it out, and it was that. The other thing was that it demonstrated consciousness, the value of consciousness. So we are made of several versions of us. Like, we have a physical body, we have a energetic body around us, we have a conscious body. Before I get out too woo in there, but it seems that the ETs have a great deal of technology based around consciousness and splitting it and using it in a way to be productive. And I believe the Starmaker project that I participated in was behind in schedule and was going badly. And so they arranged to borrow or to purchase consciousness of people that were already slaves through a technology. And so the existence that I went into when I worked on the project was a more watered down existence. We were kept as an adolescent. I was a non-human. And it was the consciousness that they took from me and used us to operate machinery and work on building a macro object in space, a star in space. So there was some science around it. There was a lot that I was unaware of. It's written from the experience of an employee, not a manager. And I wasn't treated very badly during that time. It was a completely different experience than Ceres Colony. Or Mars or any of the others. So even though I was technically slave labor, I wasn't abused badly at all. And it was a project, and then it concluded, and I woke right back up on Ceres in the hallway, which was in Ceres Colony, Cavalier. There's a little snippet there. So the book actually, I got to work out what page. So you'd read the book and then read to a certain page and then reads to Project Starmaker and then go back to Ceres Colony. Would be the correct order of it. But when you talk about these linear things, it's very hard. It's very hard to work them out and put dates to them.
Well, that's very interesting what you just said there, that there's a kind of trade in consciousness, or some people might call it soul extract. I mean, that someone's consciousness or soul extract can be sold. I mean, if they're a slave, that they can be sold and used in some other projects. So, here you are on Ceres Colony. You're a slave. You're working with the Dark Fleet, Merchant Marine, or the Nachtwaffen, and in the middle of that, I assume you weren't given a choice or anything. You were just told, we're going to kind of like get your consciousness to spend 10 years in another place, and you'll spend 10 years there, and then you come back. So you want to explain how that happened, that, here you are, you're a slave worker on Ceres, and then you're like told that you're going to be traded as part of some other project run by some other extraterrestrials for a 10-year period. So you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, they were very matter of fact about it. The day we woke up and I was brought to a place on Ceres Colony, and they lined us up, 50 guys maybe. And they were very matter of fact. There was not any kind of briefing, just you're going to go here. And it was not until the last minute, until I was waited in line, and it wasn't until I got to the front of the line that I was told what was going on. And we were told originally that if you were taken, that the science behind what brought us there on Ceres for the 20-year period was maxed out, and that if you went any longer than that, it greatly increased your risk of mentally being damaged, when you put back, being mentally handicapped when they did put you back. So how could you squeeze in another 10 years was the big thing. You can't do this, when they were putting me in the chair to begin the process. And but they said it was a different technology. So apparently the Ceres Colony Corporation had made a deal with an extraterrestrial race on the far side, what I believe is the M51 Whirlpool galaxy, the far galaxy of that space, and that area of space, which had a low star formation rate of star formation. And they had made a deal, and they had the technology to accommodate our consciousness, because it was a non-human existence and it was kept at an adolescent mentality. So it was a very watered down version of us. And we were told there was going to be another 10 years, and guys were coming in and out of the chair, and they eventually canceled it. They didn't complete it, but the deal that the Ceres Colony Corporation had made for us to participate, they acquired a new technology, and they were very happy with what they got. So they acquired a new science, or a new form of technology that they were able to develop. So it was very profitable for them to use us in that way. And according to the way that it played out, I don't want to give away the reveal. So there's a bit of a reveal at the end of the book, and I don't want to give that away, but it seems like that may have been what has been following me the entire time, and why my life events have been slightly different than others like me.
Right. So this is very interesting. So in the middle of a 20 and back, you are now just involuntarily conscripted or pushed into an additional 10 years where your consciousness goes off, spends 10 years in this other galaxy in a Starmaker project, and you come back after that 10 years and you just resume. So, I mean, is there any kind of, when you resumed, I mean, your soul, your consciousness is the same. Well, I mean, I guess it's, maybe you want to walk us through, what's changed? Is it just that you go there, you do your 10 years, you come back, your physical body, or your clone body on Ceres hasn't aged, because it's only been, I guess, an hour or something since you began that 10-year program where your consciousness is transferred and brought back. So what has changed in that 10 years? Is it just new memories?
So when I originally woke up, well, after it was over and I woke up, I had really no memory of what had just happened. I felt incredibly disoriented. I mean, like dizzy and nauseous and just very disoriented. They let us go back to our bed. They let us go back to our room. We did not have duties afterwards, if I remember that correctly. But I was disoriented for quite a while afterwards. And I'm still working out. Like I work with people. I've talked with you privately. I work with people that are assembling memories that feel like they've gone through similar things. And I pay attention to when things happen, the timeline, because I think that things that happen in a 20 and back bleed through to your real life as well, and they're cyclical. So by keeping track of when they happen, you can really flesh out some details and see that things are cyclical, and that a lot of people have the same common denominators. The same things keep popping up when I find an intake event. So for these project Starmaker, I look at the intake event, and I still haven't really narrowed it down to when it began, but it seems to have lasted longer than the 20 years. So when I look at my timeline, the 20-year period was from the age of 10 till 30, but it looks like the Starmaker timeline went from 25 to 35. So for 5 years after it was over, like there was still an extension of me out there. And I'm still sorting that out and looking back on my life to see what kind of ramifications that has or had on me. There were things that changed, and there seem to be things that are lining up when I look at it and then multiply it farther into the future. Like I said, it tends to be on cyclical things, and when you look at a timeline. So there are life events, and when I finish on that, you'll be the first person I let know. But I've been studying things, and there seem to be other aspects of my life in my real life here that lined up with that happening. Like, for instance, I didn't get the memories back until well after 15 years after I was 30. So I was 40, I believe. So 12 years, 42. So there was a long period of time before I got my memories back. And because there was still an aspect of me out there, and it's hard to determine exactly how long it all lasted. But there seems to be a kind of a watering down of somebody's emotional and mental faculties while they're taken. In other words, while they're in the 20 and back or while they're elsewhere, their person in the same time seems to have a harder time dealing with emotions and mental things, almost like they're not completely whole.
So your consciousness is transferred using some technology that was given to the German Ceres colony. Your consciousness is transferred from Ceres to some other galaxy, and you're put into the body of an asexual extraterrestrial. So you want to explain what it felt like waking up in this body that was asexual.
It was very disorienting, and it was the same race of them, but we that were in the project, 20 or 30 of us, were kept at an adolescent age. So it was after, for that whole 10 years, we were kept at a 13-year-old adolescence. So they were adult versions of the species that were in charge of us, but we were adolescents. And I believe that was another, like they used not half of my consciousness, less of it, like a watered down version. And it was very disorienting. I want to say this, that like you said, it was asexual. The body was much different than a human body. There was far less water. It was a very dry body. There was blood and everything, but it was less. And it just had different abilities to it. And I didn't feel it the entire time. I didn't really feel at home in my body. And it seemed like energy parts of my body that I have now still existed in that body and weren't really compatible with it. So I still had urges to eat food, to behave like a human, for biofunctions like a human, but that body didn't have them. So I had urges for things that didn't exist, and I had no memory of where I'd come from. That body, I was also I had amnesia. When I woke up in that body, I had no idea where I'd come from at the time. They were brand new memories, and so I was trying to sort out who and what I was. It wasn't until it was all over before I got the memories back, and even now the memories are very distant.
So you're transferred over there. You're now in the body of an adolescent asexual extraterrestrial. You've got these adult versions of that extraterrestrial race that are supervising everything. Did you ever get to find out anything about who was in control of it all? Was it another group of extraterrestrials?
So we were aware that they were, so for years, we went on and we were working on the project. We were flying equipment, we were flying machines that were moving tonnage of material in space that had been brought in an area, in a nebula of space, where we were beginning to layer a gravity well by material. So they were very concerned with elements that going in at the right time. They were layering a gravity well, where like a very large planet that they were pushing material on, but they were layering it in chemically so that when the star ignited, it would behave a certain way. So that was the science. That it was experimental. Um, we were doing that, and for years it was just a day at the office. We were unaware, really, and we were told that we were the dominant species in that galaxy. That there were other life forms, but that our species basically inhabited, 90% of all the worlds in that galaxy. That it was one that, and we found out over time that we were being lied to. But we were able to communicate with people that were not in the project. We were able to communicate with other people, other kids, if you will, in other worlds, and we could say a few words, not a full amount of words, but we could say, and over time we were able to put together kind of a picture of what was going on, and they were clearly lying to us about our situation in the universe. They were telling us things that didn't add up when we were able to cross-check with other people across the network, and it's like I said, it's a very, very distant memory, but that was the truth. So we put it together, and we were aware that we were gonna be retired at some point. That there was going to be a 10-year threshold, and we would have to quit. We quit working and go back to where we came from. And towards the end, we realized that was not their intention, and so though there were things that played out in that regard. So it's very hard to believe, looking back on it now, it's very hard to believe that one species would inhabit an entire galaxy and be dominant over an entire galaxy, but that was what we were told.
Well, this process that you describe, where you're in these, you're trained at that young age to fly these small glass ball ships and tow rocks to layer them down a gravity well in a certain way so that you could kind of like ignite or start a star. I mean, that's quite fascinating. I mean, was it really a star they were trying to create, or was it like just forming a planet? Because explain what difference there
So
is.
it was a very large project. We were aware that there were several bases around the nebula that were just like ours. So it was a very large base we were on, and we were a one component of a very large project. So this is something that involved, we were 10,000 people or 50,000 people on a project that had millions of people working on it. And it had been going on for decades. And it was towards the end, they were behind schedule, and hence they acquired us, our consciousness, of people from elsewhere to come in and assist bring the project back on schedule. They were building a small star, and the idea was that the experiment was that the star would be stable in its first 100,000 years, or very early in its life. So when they had built stars before, and they were very unstable for a million years, so they couldn't put a ring around it or build habitats around the star that could harness its energy. They had to wait a long time. So that was what they were trying to do by bringing in special elements in a time so that the star would ignite and then be stable immediately. And so that was the purpose. That's what we were told, and that was the purpose of this particular experiment. It was a small star. So, if I couldn't give it a size, but more like a white dwarf size star, like the minimum size. And they were trying to get this star to ignite and to be immediately stable so that they could build rings around it. we were told that the main product of the Bureau, we called it the Bureau because it was a different word they used, but for the writing of the book, I just named it the Bureau. We were told that their main product that the Bureau built was not stars, but rings around stars. So, or habitats around stars that they would build, and then entire civilizations would move in and live because the energy they were harnessing the free energy from stars. Um, if they could in a galaxy that had very low star forming numbers compared to like a full spiral galaxy, a healthy galaxy. This one was an irregular shaped galaxy that had a low amount of stars being created. So they were trying to supplement that number. There was plenty of material, but it wasn't gathering together the way that a spiraled galaxy does. Um, so that was the purpose of what they were doing, and basically the size, the scope of the project. There was a great deal of people involved.
Well, that's fascinating what you just described, because I mean, clearly at this point in our planetary civilization, we think in terms of, well, maybe one day, our civilization will make it to Mars and terraform Mars, and maybe we can do that to other places like the Moon. But you're saying that with some of the advanced extraterrestrials, it's well, I guess it's star making. I mean, you create a star, a small star, and it's very interesting that you said that they create a ring around that star, and that ring becomes a habitat for the civilizations. So this raises, well, so really, was their goal to kind of like get that gravity well where all of this material was being pushed down to kind of like to ignite to become like a small star and then build a ring around it?
Right. So when I say by unstable, when they had built stars in the past, and the stars, the region of space where it's giving off energy would be unstable. So the star would have an event in the distance of the ring, and then it would go back down, and it would take a few million years for it to stabilize and stay the same size. So when a star was born, after a few 100,000 years, it would grow in size or energy output, and then it would go. They were unstable, so they were trying to build a star that would immediately be stable, so that they could immediately put a ring around it much faster from the time that it ignited, and they didn't have to wait for it to stabilize because it's very dangerous in the first. Like I said, it's a great deal of time, a million years, a few million years for it to stabilize. So the project was about building a small star that would stabilize in a very short time, a few 100,000 years, and they could immediately put a habitat around it so that they could build many of them. The idea was to convert a lot of the materials. They had a lot of raw material in that galaxy that was in darkness that they could convert and build stars everywhere. The idea was to expand out, and well, I don't want to ruin the end of it.
Yeah, sure. Now, this raises a very interesting question, because in our own solar system, we have Jupiter, we have Saturn, and I think Neptune as well, that all have rings around them. And some say that both Jupiter and Saturn were failed stars. So that raises the question, did someone try this on Jupiter and Saturn to kind of like ignite those planets and create stars? And both of them have very prominent rings. Or Saturn's rings can be seen from many millions of miles away. So what do you think of that possibility?
I've always wondered if it's clear when you look at Deimos and Phobos around Mars that there's not a really logical explanation for why those moons are locked in orbit around Mars. So they clearly lend to look like an artificial effort that put those moons in orbit. There's really not a lot of research. There's not a plausible theory right now on how those got captured. They're too small, and their orbits are decaying at a rate. It just doesn't. There's a lot of math around those. It looks like those were deliberately placed. When I look at the Saturn rings, I've always wondered that myself, but I really don't have any insight into that. I will tell you that the difference between our solar system and the system that we had built, the project Starmaker took place, is it was in a nebula. So it was a very dark area. You couldn't see any other stars nearby. It was a very gaseous place to begin with. So it was a nebula that had a lot of material to begin a gravity well in the first place. So our region of space is relatively clean. If you were going to build a star, I think it would take a lot more effort to move the material here. So for that reason, I don't know. I don't have a lot of insight into that. So I would just say the difference is in Project Starmaker, that place was a very cluttered region of space, and you couldn't see anything. It was pitch dark. There were no stars, and there was no light in there because it was in a cloud.
Well, there's a book by a former NASA scientist, Norman Bergrum. It's called The Ringmakers of Saturn. And he was putting out the idea that Saturn's rings were artificially created by extraterrestrials, and that these were used for various purposes. I mean, clearly creating a habitat like some kind of Dyson sphere around Saturn is a possibility, which is, it sounds like that's what Project Starmaker was trying to create. So with Saturn, our planet and our planets in the solar system and the rings around it, this could have been, this is the remnants, it might be the remnants of, or still could be, a functioning extraterrestrial civilization that lives on the rings of what was once a star, or maybe it's a failed star, but nevertheless, the heat put off by Saturn is sufficient to heat up that environment where the rings are, so that you can actually have a civilization flourishing there.
I've actually only recently seen that Saturn gives off the most energy of anything in the solar system. That Saturn gives off the most energy, more energy than I don't want to say the sun, but there's a stat there that Saturn gives off the most energy of any body in the solar system. So that would make a lot of sense that that they would build. I think mainstream science, when they talk about the rings of Saturn or anything like that, they are overwhelmed, but they're still thinking in terms of cost or size, and say there's no way that they would build something that big. And when my testimony in Project Starmaker, obviously is they're building something much bigger. But when we look back in history, I think when they settled America and began with the railroad tracks, they would have never imagined, hundreds of highways that connect from one side, from coast to coast either. So the amount of work we've done building just our road system could be an example of how unimaginable some macro objects are that are probably already being built nearby. When in Ceres colony, we were aware that in between the Earth and the next star, that there's a very large space station by advanced extraterrestrials that is there, and we did visit it on a couple occasions. But it's a very advanced space station, and it's in between. It's a couple light years out, but it's in between our star and the next one, and it was huge. So there are definitely massive space stations, not only in between the stars, but in our solar system as well, that we were aware of, that are very hard to detect from our, that the astronomy of the Earth is very hard to detect. So macro objects, I think, are just a logical conclusion of societies that are not oppressing each other over energy consumption. So, like I said, we have been sold this idea that things are too expensive to do, and yet big things keep getting built in the world. So I think there's a real facade over what's possible to build and what's not.
When I think of the Saturn's rings and who built them, what comes to mind is the Anunnaki. Now, I know there have been several sources that have come out and said that Saturn was actually the headquarters for the Anunnaki, which would make sense, that if you wanted to run the entire solar system, Saturn would be a good place. And maybe the energy it's giving off is a great way to power up your ships. So if Saturn was the home base of the Anunnaki, then we have something kind of analogous to what was happening in this far distant galaxy, because there you described how there's a Starmaker project where they use slaves. The Anunnaki, they are known to have used slaves. Their first set of slaves, the Igigi, they rebelled because they were exploited, and that's why one of the principal reasons why the humans were created, to replace this kind of like lesser caste of the Anunnaki called the Igigi. So with just to me, it just kind of seems to be a pattern that some of these advanced extraterrestrial civilizations that they will use slave workers for these kind of large planetary scale projects or stellar projects, whether it's to terraform a planet, whether it's to create an artificial star, that they will use slaves to do the repetitive, boring work.
So the word slavery is a misnomer, not a misnomer. Let me say this right. I'm trying to choose my words correctly here. This is a very big subject. It's a very emotional subject for a lot of people. Some people understand slavery today better than others and the effects of it. So slavery is a very loaded word. But we don't look at animals as slaves. And we don't look at, I live in an area of Michigan that still has a great Amish population, people that are still living without modern technology. They're still using horses. They have you see the horses going down the road and they plow. I can drive by and I see them plowing fields with the old style. And we've never really considered the horses or the donkey as a slave. Slavery, we consider equals, people that are just like us, the same species, to be slaves. So that's why it's a very loaded emotionally thing. But these ETs, the missing narrative is that they live longer. They have access to great genetic technologies, and so they see themselves as above us, and that we are more like a workhorse. And so the slavery isn't as loaded of a deal as what we're hearing about it. So this is a concept, and I'm not giving it a pass. I'm not saying for what it is, but we have to understand that there are civilizations and there are extraterrestrials that see us as a lower life form. And so and because of where we're at technologically and because of where we're at spiritually and how we're being held down by ourselves ultimately, and probably by influence from extraterrestrials, that we're held down. We're held down into a certain level so that we can be used to this way. And that's to me, when you think about the secrecy over a millennia of their existence, this would explain it, so that they could come by and use us for projects like such as this. So I don't want to give any kind of excuse or any kind of what is that the syndrome where you begin to like your captor. I forget what that's called, but
Stockholm syndrome.
Stockholm syndrome. I don't want to seem like I'm a case of that. I just try to, like I said, I always look back at what happened to me. After I got over the pain and the anger and the sadness and the realization of what happened to me, and I've salvaged some happiness out of my life in my real life, I look back on it and try to ask why. Why did they do this? Why? How? People go. You can go to the religious. Well, how could God let this happen? And I've always put hours and hours behind it. And the thing is, it keeps returning to logical things. We don't think twice about the workhorse that we have. For hundreds of years, we used horses for everything. They were our slaves. We have dogs in our house that are our security system. It's a form of slavery. And so ETs are doing the same thing. And like I said, over time, as we start to close the gap between advanced extraterrestrials and ourselves, as we begin to understand our consciousness and the way that it manipulates reality, that our consciousness is actually very important, that we are more than our bodies, we're more than just one lifetime, and that we are worthy of the stars and our place in the universe. As we close that gap, slavery is just going to fall to the wayside, and as we become more equal. That's just my personal opinion. That's where I'm at after what I've experienced. But when you look at it and look at it why, and it's got this terrible connotation, slavery is a crime, I believe. But we just have to look. We just have to look at where we are in our own development and keep looking forward. Slavery will eventually boil off and be worthless, I believe.
Well, there's a very interesting kind of developmental process here with advanced extraterrestrial species that will create worker races that are asexual, who don't have the power to reproduce, and to use them as kind of like slave labor or as workhorses to do these kind of like very boring projects. Now, I remember reading Dolores Cannon's book series, The Convoluted Universe, and I remember her describing the memories of um, several of the clients that she worked with that described living as these asexual extraterrestrials, and their descriptions kind of matched what you describe in Project Starmaker. That what they remembered was uh, that it was pretty boring. It There was a lot of kind of like suicidal efforts, just because it was such an unsatisfying existence, and people just didn't enjoy that life. It was just full of monotony. So whoever created them, whether it was the Anunnaki or some other extraterrestrial civilization, they use their knowledge of genetics to create an asexual worker drone that will do all of this monotonous work. But in order for that drone to function, it needs to have some consciousness inhabit it, and the consciousness that goes in finds it really tedious and boring, and becomes suicidal. So I thought that was interesting because it matched what you described in your book.
You're blowing my mind here because I'm completely unaware of that information. I'm unaware of the first book, The Ringmakers of Saturn, and I'm familiar with Dolores Cannon, her work obviously, and Suzanne Spooner is a friend of mine. I'm very aware of that, but I had no idea of those testimonies whatsoever. So I believe that in the beginning, if people that have followed my story in the beginning, they asked my permission. They said, we need to get your permission. And I don't think that that's because it's a law, that if I would have said no, that they would have thrown me back. I believe that they get your permission because it lowers your chance of suicide throughout the 20 years, throughout the years of being. So people that give their permission are more likely to not suicide, and people that don't give their permission in the beginning are likely to attempt suicide throughout the time. And I think that's part of the reason they do that. So I'll give this away then, since this is where we're at. In the book, suicide was what happened. So all of that line in the hallway of guys that were being taken into the Starmaker project, a great deal of them committed suicide, and that's why it was canceled. So instead of 100, they had contracted for X amount, 1,000 men, but they only got a few hundred because the number of suicide was huge, and they canceled the project. But the down payment of the technology that they had traded was a huge success. So the Ceres Colony Corp, even though they didn't complete the deal, they didn't give all the men and all of the technology that they had agreed to acquire, didn't come back. They still acquired enough technology to advance their science greatly, and so it was a win for them. And so many the problem on the back end of it that they eventually had to cancel it. They didn't complete the deal. So that does match with what you're saying. I will say this about the asexual existence: I still had the energy, sexual energy, there without the body for it. So I knew something. I knew, even though I had been told a false story or a story that encompassed my existence, I knew that something was very different about my existence. So I don't know how appropriate that is to talk about greatly. I did cover it in the book some, but I'm saying that basically the energies of my existence as a human were still there, even though I was not in a human body. And that it led to, it wasn't, I guess, other than restlessness versus boredom. So it was a boring existence, but it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't full of abuse or anything like that. It was more restless than anything else.
Well, what I find kind of like very helpful in what you've described in your book and what we've been talking about is that it gives us a little bit more clarity into what it was that the Anunnaki were doing, um, presumably 200,000 years ago when they created modern Homo sapiens, that they first experimented, they created these asexual beings, and that experiment failed. And then Enki came along and decided that, well, for this project, this genetic experiment of humanity to create, we will create male and female, and we'll endow them with a certain degree of knowledge, so that way they can like aspire to something better. And then you're not going to have the problem of like these asexual beings that are created as a worker race, but just you know out of boredom and out of depression, if they commit suicide. That when you create sexual beings that have the capability of reproducing and also accumulating knowledge, so that therefore they can aspire to something better, then you're going to have a much happier and much more motivated workforce.
Love does make the world go round. It does make life worth living. So it would be I'm a very optimistic person after what I've been through always, but I got to say that without loving relationships, so life would be very bland, very tasteless, overall. Just, I mean, I guess that's true. So I'm unaware of a lot of the historical references. Like you're somebody that studies all the accounts of, the ancient aliens and the origins of mankind. And I know Elena shares a lot of great info on that, but it's not my wheelhouse. So it's I don't want to say shocking, but it's surprising to me that my book that I wrote actually dovetails into what you've been studying elsewhere, because I don't follow it. I mean, yours is one of the only shows that I watch, and I don't watch every episode. I love to keep up on JP's info. I just love hearing his stuff, and everybody else that you've had on. But I don't study, for a large part, because I don't like to convolute my own information. So I don't study a lot of other information a lot in the community. I don't watch every show that comes along.
Okay, so one of the things that I think that is kind of very helpful here is uh, with the creation of humans, the human body, this avatar that we live in, endowed with these abilities, we can evolve, we can grow, and that is helpful for our kind of sanity. Whereas these asexual workers, they really don't last long, or they're very unhappy and suicidal and so forth. And if you transfer consciousness, I mean, must have been kind of like really difficult for you, because your consciousness was transferred into this asexual body, but you still have some kind of soul memory or awareness of your existence as a human, and you felt the sexual energies, and so that must have been would have compounded what was already a very challenging situation.
There was a lot of disorientation, and it's almost like I was in a body. I hate to put it in a way, and I hate to put it in these terms, but it felt like I was somebody that had 7 chakras that was in a 5 chakra body. So that's and so like a body that I don't fit in.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the experience. And as a result, there was a restlessness about it. It was restless. So the other thing is that they had methods of discipline that were different. There was a light they would shine that would irritate you, and that was the matter. When you were misbehaving, the light would come on, and the computer would say, "Stop, behave, go to bed, time for bed," and you would be irritated. And that was something that was unique to that physiology. It's something that wouldn't work on us. So their physiology, that was a technology that was there. It wasn't inhumane or anything. It was, it was kind of, it was just a disciplinary thing. And it was just a different existence. Like I said, the amount of water, we didn't shower in water. We showered in a light and like ultrasonic shower that shook you. And it was just a different existence. It was something, and after being human, naturally being human, you knew that these things were missing. it was just, I couldn't put my finger on it at the time, couldn't put my head around it at the time, but it was things like that, and I think everybody knows that there are things, everybody has some kind of radar that tells them things are wrong when they don't know what is wrong exactly. And that's exactly what that felt like. So, and it was 10 years. It was supposed to be 10 years, but at the end of it, they alluded to another 10 years, that it was something that could go perpetually for a long time. And so that's what I think was the driving factor in the mass amount of people that participated suicide. I think that they were promising 10 years, but decided they were going to keep us longer. Again, I don't want to give everything up.
Sure. Well, makes sense. I mean, if these workers are designed to operate in a nebula which doesn't have stars and there's not much light, then a concentrated burst of light would overwhelm the body. And so, that would make sense how that was chosen as the way to punish workers that didn't do what they were supposed to do or meet their quota.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it wasn't so much about that, but like I said, there was a restlessness where I wanted to get out, and there were times when you'd throw a fit, or just, we were adolescents. I was at the level of a 12 or 13-year-old boy. That was my mindset, and I saw the world that way. We were not allowed to really progress, and so I think it took less consciousness as a result to do that. But that was the existence that I remember. We stayed that way. We didn't really age in the way that you would think over that period of time.
So you want to tell me a little bit about your co-author, Jackie Kerner, because you described one incident, a drowning incident, which I thought was very interesting. Why don't you tell us about that drowning incident and how Jackie played a role in that?
So there's a lot of strangeness around how I met Jackie Kerner and the work we did. So, and it even goes back to the time when I was originally working with you. I told you before that, you and I had parted ways. You said I couldn't work with you. And then I was visited by a being that's asked me what was my intention of coming forward. It turns out that at the same exact time, she was visited by a being as well. And her entire life changed. She was in the corporate world. And Jackie, I know if you're watching this, and I don't want to give out a lot of your personal info, but she was in the corporate world and doing quite well. She's a very freakishly brilliant person. She had, I believe, a master's degree by the age of 21 and went up the corporate ladder just as fast. And she changed everything. She had psychic gifts emerge immediately after that and walked away from the corporate world and went back home to her home state. And she's a psychic medium, and she teaches that. She does courses, and she provides that, and she's professional at it and makes a good living doing that. But at the same time that I was contacted, she was contacted, and then we ran into each other. And my story, she saw me, I believe, when I was on one of the networks. She saw one of my shows and immediately had to contact me because it has her own memories to reconcile. And she was unaware of the time dilation, the same way that when I saw Randy Kramer's info, how it explained to me what happened to me. So she put that together, contacted me, and we became fast friends. We still are friends. And as we spoke with each other, we began to realize that there were many similarities. When I was a child, I believe I was 7 at the time, my family had been coming up north to Michigan in the summers and camping and such. And we went camping, and I was swimming with my sister, and I was on a raft with my sister. I did not know how to swim. And we got knocked over. Some boys were flirting with my sister. We were very young. I was 7. I think she was 12. And whatever boys were flirting, they knocked us over, and the girls swam back to the raft, and I was sinking and drowning. And I was not kicking, and I was in a panic, and I was 5 feet underwater and dying and literally drowning. And I saw someone go, I closed my eyes and I heard someone say, just relax, stop, and just kick. And I forget the exact wording, but when I got up, so I did, and I that was the first time in my life I really swam. And I got up to the top, and my dad came and got me out. And when we got back to shore, I said, "Where's Jackie?" And my sister said, "Who's Jackie? Who are you talking about?" That's something that I never forgot, because my sister kind of picked on me for years after that. So where's Jackie? Where's Jackie? And fast forward to after when her and I met each other, and we were experimenting with different meditation forms of meditation, which I teach in my my Patreon groups, the Tier 3 and the remote. I have a remote viewing group, and these are forms of things that I remember from Inyokern, the techniques of meditation when I was in some of the early programs in the beginning of my 20 back. So I hope I'm not being too confusing. She went back and saw that instant. So she went back in time one day when we were meditating on that and said the whole, and I hope I'm saying this, I hope I'm saying all this info right, because I'm trying to speak for her perspective as well. But it was something from the future. Like she went back and actually affected that scene in my life when I was drowning. And when we kind of unpacked that, I went, "Oh my God, you're the Jackie that was in that was doing that." So it seems like the more that we get into consciousness, when you get into deep meditation and deep the remote viewing and even manifesting, like synchronized manifesting meditations, that consciousness doesn't pay attention to what time it is, that you can reach back into the past to manipulate time and in the future and manipulate events that are going to happen. And that was something that we discovered that we were kind of shocked about. It was like something that we did in the future that affected the past. Many other things have come forward, and like I said, the Project Starmaker, the stories inside Starmaker was something that she was very motivated to get out into a book form after Ceres Colony Cavalier, because it is something that the stories, the things that I remembered really punctuated what she had known as well by working with many other people in their own personal ways. So that was what she wanted to do. And she put, 4 or 5 chapters of her own story into Project Starmaker, her own short stories. And they've been well received. I've really had great reviews. Some people really only want to get to the space story. They want lasers and spaceships and not the spiritual stuff. And some people are really, really, after they read it once and then they go back, they want to read it again because it's dense information, and they find out that the spiritual stuff is really the core of the book. Well, really the value of the book.
Yeah, that was a fascinating incident, because it does kind of raise this issue of time. That time is not linear. Everyone says time isn't linear, and so in that incident that you described, clearly Jackie from the future that you met somehow rescued you as a 7-year-old while you were drowning. And so, I mean, a lot of people will say, well, how can that be possible? I mean, if you had drowned, she would never have met you. So how could she ever, want to go back and rescue you? But yet, so it just raises the question, well, if time isn't linear and that it all goes by consciousness, is it really, when we as conscious beings are at our more kind of like developed, mature state, that we have a greater influence over our states of being when we were kind of like still in the evolving process? Because clearly, as a 7-year-old, you're still evolving, but as a 40 or 50 50-year-old, when you met Jackie, your consciousness is much more fully developed. So maybe that has a greater influence, that our future self can have a greater influence on our lives than we could ever dream of, that we think, well, the things I do now influence the future, but it's actually the other way around. It's the future that influences the present.
I've often thought that there may be an anti-time, that there may be that we may be experiencing it in the forward direction, but our consciousness, before we incarnated, may experience it from the front going backward. So that we can, like, I always felt like our lives are a choose your own adventure, and we look at the entirety of it and we get to make our choices before we begin. I believe there's a life agreement, and these are spiritual things, so they're personal, and everybody, I think everybody should come to their own conclusion about what they feel like about their own life, spiritually. But I've always felt that there is a permission, and I felt from the flights in Peru, which doesn't make sense, but is covered in the book, from my time when I was brought near death over and over again in Peru, that's what forms my opinion of incarnation from what I experienced in that. And I feel that we choose our life, we choose benchmarks, things that are destiny, and then we do have free will in between those benchmarks in our life. And I think that my life has changed greatly. Like, if I wouldn't have wrote the first book, my life has completely deviated from the direction it was going after the book was released. I think it was a major change in the direction that my life was going. And I may or may not have written it. There was a time when I actually consciously said, "Look, I got to write this book, or I got to finish it." And we cut out a lot of things and just got it done. So, am I to the do I know exactly everything about that, how that works, time and the consciousness? No. And am I gotten to the bottom of it? No. But I'm not the only one that has stories like this. And there's a lot and we're getting them more and more. We're getting people, the world is different consciously now than it was 20, 30 years ago. It's much different. And more people are waking up to know that they are greater, that the mental faculty and your consciousness does a lot more than what we believe that it did. And so it's just going mainstream, and I think that's part of the process. When we interact with extraterrestrials, we are going to have to face the fact that psychic ability, ESP, that these things, advanced conscious ability, is the norm. It's not the exception, it's the rule. And that everybody has them. Everybody has their own unique version of the same gifts. And this is also going to be, this is also a condition of disclosure. And so I think it's great news. I think that science, spirituality, and what do you call it? All the truthers, the psychic phenomenon, and extraterrestrials are all in the same exact boat. And we believe that they're different subjects, but they're not.
It's going to be an amazing thing to watch the whole planet wake up to the truth of all of these things, and people that have been skeptical will suddenly have to kind of like reevaluate very, very quickly. Years of skepticism and trash talking others that have been describing these very things that are being revealed. So I know you're going to be one of the presenters at the Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection, as I am. So can you give a teaser as to what you're going to be talking about there in October in Orlando?
Sure. I'm going to recap. I'm not sure what kind of time slot Danny will give me, but bless her, I know she's doing her best with everything. And those girls that put that conference together are just absolutely dynamos and extremely talented. That conference is built well from the top down. I plan on representing the new information, so I'll get you guys a picture of that plane that we found, and I have a few other things planned in between now and then, a couple trips planned that I'm going to do, and I may have some good information to present from those. I'm going to present on the Project Starmaker. I will talk about that briefly. And I'm going to talk about the company that I started in the wake of last year's Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection Conference, where I made, where I realized I pitched the learning decision-based learning that I remembered from my time on Mars. So I went to school while I was in the space program up there. And the method of learning was much different than what we have down here. And I always said, look, please, somebody take this and run with this. Our education system is in dire straits. And it fell on me. Everybody said, well, why don't you just do it? So I've started a company, and I'm going to go over the basics of that and where we're at. We've been working very hard. It's what I do full-time now. And we're working very hard at it, and it's very promising. And it's basically active decision-based learning. And we're starting with a preschool curriculum. I'll get you guys some cartoons we're working on to show in the while I'm on stage there, and how that's working, and basically how the logic of it all works. And it's very promising. The education system, the more I research into it, it's kind of the whole problem and the whole cure. So when you talk about, you can't fix people that are grown up, but you can teach the children to be fixed in the beginning. So it's, like I said, it's the entire problem, and it's the entire cure. So I've got lofty goals for that, but if I can contribute anything. And the idea is that I use this system that I remembered from my time on Mars being retrained to be ship maintenance, and shave some time off what a normal student has to learn the same thing. And if I can shave 5, 10, 20% off the learning curriculum, and slow down for the kids that struggle and speed up for the kids that are whizzes, it'll be far more efficient and a better experience to learn the basics of life that we do. And we're looking into some industrial applications as well, and with it. So it's a very huge subject, and it fell in my lap, and that's what I've been working on. So I will present on that as well. And I'm looking forward to hanging out with you guys, and Danny, and Elena, and Chris, and John Charles. I can't wait. And there's new testimonies, Corinna and Melanie. I can't wait to give everybody a big hug there. Anybody that comes out, I'm going to bring a clicker and count all my hugs, and try to set the record this year. But I can't wait to see all you guys again. It's going to be a great time. Magical. It's absolutely magical when we're all together.
Yeah, I think you got the record for last year, so you probably want to hold on to that title. So Project Starmaker, where do people go to get that? And if they also want Ceres Colony Cavalier, or where can they get these books?
Sure, they're on Amazon, and I come up on Amazon now, but on TonyRodrigues.com, which I have in my name tag there, is my website, so you can email me there. There are memory courses, I book courses there. There are links to our original Exopolitics, the very first interview I ever did on Exopolitics. There's links to my Patreon show, Talks with Tony, which I have live groups. I'm meeting groups quite a bit now in Zoom calls. I do a remote viewing group where we target things. It's very astonishing. We beat the odds every single week. There is a meditation group, and then my shows my show that's behind a paywall so that it doesn't get deleted like a lot of shows did off you. We all had trouble with content being deleted. So that's my Patreon, but there are also links to both books on the website as well.
Well, I want to thank you, Tony, for coming on Exopolitics today and telling us about these experiences in your new book, Project Starmaker, which I do recommend people to get and to just connect more of the puzzle pieces by listening or reading about Tony's amazing experiences on Ceres and in this distant nebula. So thank you, Tony.
Thank you. But absolute honor to be here. The truth is much stranger than fiction, and our minds have to open up to get it all in there. So we all have a lot of growth to do, and the future is very bright.
You have been listening to Exopolitics today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.